Hi guys, KO here. Welcome to Turmeric and Tequila, where we are working to inspire positive, radical social evolution by uniting mission-driven humans. We have the Dr. Peter McGraw in the house. He has a PhD in quantitative psychology from The Ohio State University. He's a fellow podcaster, author, keynote speaker, including a TEDx talk, a professor and an adventurer, even some weightlifting, I've heard. Peter has been a guest on the Joe Rogan Show and appeared in a multitude of media spots, including the Today Show, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal.
It's a really terrible metric because you can have a meaningful relationship that may last a few weeks or months or a couple years that may change your life. You may look back on it fondly and, it spurred great growth. And you might be in a relationship for 10 years that you look back on and you go, I can't believe I wasted all of that time.
Enjoy this conversation and be sure to check us out wherever you get your podcasts. And the video will be on YouTube. Cheers.
Welcome to Turmeric and Tequila with your host, Kristen Olson. Questioning a better way, one gracefully disruptive conversation at a time.
Welcome to Turmeric and Tequila. I am so excited today, as every cast, but we have the Dr. Peter McGraw in the house. This is actually a long time coming, and I was on his podcast, and we had a phenomenal conversation. We're both actually in Denver, Colorado. We have some pretty solid things in common. My background, my academic journey is not as in-depth as his, which we'll share. But before I jump into the bio, Peter, welcome to Turmeric and Tequila.
I love that we're both in Denver, but we are in our separate residences, our separate studios, which yours is much nicer than mine. Yes.
Full transparency, it's actually not. I've seen his studio. It's very legit. It's beautiful. Mine is a part of my garage that we rebuilt out. But I appreciate that it looks that way. So as a branding professional, we've done our job.
Indeed.
Okay, so let's give you the 411 on Dr. McGraw here. McGraw is an expert in the interdisciplinary fields of judgment, emotion, and choice. He has a PhD in quantitative psychology from The Ohio State University. He's a fellow podcaster, author, keynote speaker, including a TEDx talk, a professor, and an adventurer, even some weightlifting, I've heard. Peter has been a guest on the Joe Rogan Show and appeared in a multitude of media spots, including the Today Show, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. There is so much we can talk about with Peter. He is an expert in so many things in the academic arena, but really IRL, in real life. He's actually walked through a lot of things. But today we're going to talk about his initiative, The Solo Life. It's a podcast, and it's for the single person's guide to live a remarkable life. If you know me and you listen to Turmeric and Tequila, you know my focus has always been in my business, in my athletics. I've had relationships along the way, but it's never been my main draw to life. So I think we have different starting points, but Peter has really put an academic standpoint to this. And again, it's not only like teaching and sharing his gospel, he's living in it. So I'm really excited to unpack that. So without further ado, Peter, why don't you give us a little bit of your version of your background?
Yeah, let's, I think we should step into the single stuff.
Okay. Rock and roll.
I think it's hard to disentwine them fully. To be honest, I don't think I'd be as successful in life if I had any sort of luck with the ladies as a young man.
Okay.
I mean, at age 16, I was already putting off marriage. So I have a story. I was part of a lunch table, and the topic of when you will get married came up with this group of 6 boys, 16-year-olds. And the question was when, not if. And I remember my answer was the highest of the group. And I said, I probably won't get married till after I'm 30, which is not a big deal these days. But at that time, the average age of first marriage was 25.
Yeah.
It's been creeping up close to 30 now. And I ended up, just sort of struggling with my home life, unhappy parents, a bad relationship, not good role models. And I just wanted to go out into the world. I wanted to shake the dust off of my South Jersey roots and see the world and have adventures. I wanted to become an academic and an athlete. And I threw myself into this world because the world of relationships wasn't quite working for me, as it often doesn't for a lot of young men. And luckily had success academically, athletically, and built this really wonderful life as a professor at the University of Colorado, had relationships along the way, but they never quite fit. They never quite worked. And as a result of that, the world told me there was something wrong with me. And some of my exes might have said the same thing. Despite healthy, happy relationships, these were not tumultuous ones in any way. They just would reach a certain point and I wouldn't want them to move forward. I wouldn't want, as we'll talk about, to merge my life fully. Fell into the study of humor, spent a dozen years cracking the humor code, doing a lot of those things that you mentioned. And then sort of on the cusp of turning 50, I turned my attention to my bachelorhood, to living single, and the realization that I was living single and living well, and that I might have some insights, both personal and professional, to impart on a world that doesn't talk much about this topic. And yet the world has changed quite a lot demographically since that 16-year-old boy was sitting at that lunch table.
That's amazing. So I want to start at the very beginning of this, and that background was perfect. So well done, gold star here. Do you think it's a product of your initial childhood and because of your role models? Because I will jump ahead and say, I think even to this day, when I'm not married without kids at 41, almost 42, I feel like my parents feel to this day, even though I've had success and I'm genuinely happy, like they feel some guilt around it because they are divorced. And while they're good, they're healthy relationship now, or as healthy as I think parents can be. Yeah. But I think they still carry some stigma. So do you think that was a major piece of your journey into this solo life very early on?
I've reflected on this a lot, and I'm not one of these people who believe that all of our problems can be traced back to, our childhood. Some of those things are genetic, some of those things that we've learned bad patterns and so on. I would say that I didn't get off to a good start. My dad was largely absent. My mom really struggled with an emotional disorder. It was a chaotic household. It was a difficult place. We grew up poor. I say we were food stamps poor. We weren't welfare poor. For me, I didn't have those role models. Yeah, so I didn't see that as kind of a guaranteed path to happiness. If anything, it seemed a little risky, frankly. And then what happened was, I was so much under her thumb, her trying to protect us. And, this is a single mom, sometimes working 3 jobs. She just put the clamps down on us because she loved us, because she wanted to keep us safe. And my sister and I, frankly, really resented that because we were good kids. And so when I went off to college, I felt this freedom that I had never felt before, because I always had to be this good little boy. And that freedom was intoxicating to me. And especially so because I didn't get intoxicated. I didn't drink in college. And it took a long time to sort of develop the kind of skills to have romantic and sexual relationships work well for me. And while that was happening, I turned my attention to other exciting endeavors that were, as you know, incredibly rewarding. And what has happened, and I'm happy to talk about, is this recognition that there are many ways to live a remarkable life. There's not just one way to do it. I happen to be living mine, but in the simulation, perhaps I am married. Perhaps I have children. I certainly am in some situations. I've had some near misses in life. And some of those relationships would be, I think, outstanding, would be stellar, and then others would be really quite fraught. Just statistically, right? 33% of marriages end in divorce, and most relationships end, whether they end in a positive or negative fashion. And so the story of relationships aren't a story of fairy tales as much as they are a story of personal development and challenge and growth and heartbreak and spectacular experiences. And so this idea that, oh, you do this thing and you will be happy, is overly simplified and frankly not supported by the data.
So well said. I agree with you. Nurture and nature, in my opinion, always plays a role in where we come from and how we walk through life. And I don't know if you're religious or spiritual. I kind of segue on the other side of like, we have control. You have to show up intentionally to make choices, but a lot of it is not in our control, and things are just happening. Perhaps, if we do have this lined out path, depending on what you believe, things are as they should be. So why do we need to fight it so much? And like society puts us in these boxes where we need to be doing things a certain way. But I always kind of line up somewhere in between, like, it is what it is. It's meant to be a certain way, and, or potentially nurture nature. Cause I look back at my family experience and I think most people, it looked very picture perfect from the outside, and it wasn't. Nothing is, but it was for the most part pretty darn good. And I learned so much. I saw my parents didn't hide fights from us or anything. And while I think most people think that's bad, I am truthfully grateful that I had that intel early on. And like you said, I saw the work and the commitment. Not that it was tragic or that I'm against marriage now. I am just very aware of the amount of work that goes in, and I'm used to working hard at things I care about. So if I'm packing in one more thing I need to work really hard at, there's not a lot of space for that. Like it's opportunity cost. Like it only can go so many spaces.
Indeed. Actually, one of the things that I talk a lot about is what helps make a single person's life remarkable is this economic notion of optionality, that the time, the energy, the money, the resources that you would spend on a partnership, a family especially, could be turned to other things, to write books, to make podcasts, to develop vaccines, to to run for office. There's so many ways that you can dedicate your life that is worthwhile to the world beyond this one way, which is to produce children and promote growth at a global level. And so I think that is an important recognition that we want people living in the same way that we celebrate diversity with regard to ethnicity and religion and sexuality and so on. I think we want to support relationship diversity, because both families and non-families contribute to the world. They do so in different ways, and they often do so in really complementary ways.
Absolutely. Being very aware, it sounds like even as a young human, and kind of being a product of environment, but really understanding, I think, on a deeper level earlier than a lot of us probably did. When did it really flick on for you that this might be my avenue, like the solo life? Like instead of keep trying to do what relationship after relationship, like what was the point where it's like, I'm going to approach this differently? Because this isn't a talked about thing. And, as you said, you're approaching 50. What was the point where it's like, I'm outside of society and I'm actually going to make this non-thing a thing, or at least I'm going to start talking about it?
Yeah. So I would say there's several points along the way. This was 50 years coming, not 50 years coming, but this was 34 years coming, right? So age 16, already recognizing I'm different. Age 34, I moved to Boulder, Colorado. I took my first academic job as an assistant professor at the University of Colorado, Boulder, a dream job for me. And I wanted to celebrate it. And so I threw myself a bachelor party. And no engagement, no girlfriend or anything. And I remember actually the email that I sent out, the subject title was Premature Bachelor Party. And in it, I said, if you come to this party, you're absolved of having to come to a bachelor party should I ever get married. But I already was doubting at age 34 that this was going to happen for me. And so I decided to celebrate my bachelorhood. By the way, a bachelor party with a true bachelor is a little bit more fun than the typical one. At least there's less guilt associated with the activities.
For sure.
And I had 15 friends fly in from all over the country to celebrate this. I think that the next thing that happened for me was fast forward ahead about 4 years, and I had a kind of a very dynamic relationship with a woman, long distance relationship, a woman I fell in love with. And that relationship struggled from the very beginning, despite our very strong attraction to each other and really actually sharing a lot of the same values, lifestyle perspectives. She's a wonderful, a really wonderful person, but she really wanted to have children. Mm-hmm. And I have never felt a strong tug to have children. Frankly, I never really felt anything about wanting to have my own kids. I was sort of so focused on all these other things. It's not because I thought I'd be bad at it or anything. I just never really wanted to do it.
Mhm.
And I was honest with her about that. And that caused a rift that eventually ended the relationship. And it was heartbreaking end to the relationship. And I remember exactly where I was in my apartment. I was standing by the side of my bed, and it came over me as I was lamenting. Hey,
Universe speaks.
that's right. That's for people who are watching the video. So I remember, like, regularly feeling, what's wrong with me? Why can't I make this stuff work? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? And I remember having this insight in which I realized I'm happy when I'm single.
Mm-hmm.
My life, it's a good life. It is one that is healthy, and it's happy, and it's fun, and there's personal growth and there's professional growth. I have a huge group of friends. I have 15 friends flying from all over the country for a fake bachelor party, just 4 years earlier. And I realized that I don't need this to happen to make my life, for me to be complete. I'm already complete. And then the last thing really was just very simple. I was looking for a new project. I was looking for a new creative endeavor. I was winding down the humor research, and I thought, I'm going to write a book about turning 50 and about turning 50 as a bachelor, and about how to do it well, because there's not many resources out there for single people. And that initial idea turned into to a podcast first, Solo, The Single Person's Guide to a Remarkable Life. It's not just for men. It's actually for both men and women. 2/3 of my listeners are women. I think they tend to be a little more keen on seeking out resources. They feel the pain of being single. The world's a lot harder on single women than it is on single men. And it's been life-changing. I mean, as a result of this project, I have a new approach to dating. I feel comfortable for who I am. And then most importantly, it's been the most emotional project I've ever had. I'm probably at the point now where on a daily basis, I receive a message from someone thanking me for this work, saying I felt all alone. I thought there was something wrong with me. I was getting it from all angles, from society and from the people who love me. And now I see that I don't have to do this thing to live a remarkable life. And I had a woman say, "I'm glad you were born." I've never had someone ever tell me that they were glad I was born. And a stranger from Washington, D.C. put that in an email to me. And so I'm compelled to get the word out.
I think that feedback, it's such a deep compliment. Thank you. I'm glad you were born. That's so intentional and in depth, because I don't know that people are saying that to, I'm a huge Madonna fan, but Madonna or Oprah, whoever you look up to,
yeah,
I know they're influential, but I think it just shows the grips of society's expectations on our everyday realities. Even as we're grown, educated, aware, adult individuals, there's still that like stigma that carries so heavily with us. And I'm certainly that's certainly something I still carry to this day, and that I work. But it even I've never dug into any sort of like single life community or anything like that. That's work, just like being in a relationship, chasing the single community is the same thing. But when I found out about you, shout out to Steve, he actually told me at DSR, and he's like, I've got this guy, and he was doing this podcast because we did this great conversation on recovery. And when he asked me, he's like, "But are you single?" He like covered his mouth because he didn't want me to be embarrassed. And I was like, dude,
right.
you can straight up ask me. But in that transaction, or in that conversation, I'm like, oh my God, that like, I'm not embarrassed. I'm like, we've crossed that road to where it's like, this is my authentic self. And if a relationship happens, I'm not completely to the space of like where I've got it all figured out, but I'm certainly content on where I'm at. And my heart and mind are open if that goes towards a relationship or goes towards a business initiative, whatever. But still, in this day and age, in 2021, I think it was, he was, concerned about my feelings about asking if I was single or not, thinking that if I said yes, I would be ashamed. So,
yes.
And you brought up a good point. It's a double-edged sword for males versus females. And you talked about this on one of your casts, but tell me a little bit more about how your conversations are with men versus women in this solo community.
Yeah, certainly. First, before I say this, one thing that's very nice about you, Kristen, is that you are not single in my eyes. You are solo. And there's a difference between those two things. And I can talk about that if you want,
By
because
all
I think your
means.
listeners are going to want to figure out, are they single or are they solo?
Let's go.
All right. We'll get back to the boys versus girls thing in a bit. So single is about relationship status. It's about demographics, right? Are you partnered or are you not partnered? That's there. And the average single person has a single person's mindset. They want to ride what we call the relationship escalator. And until then, and we know you don't even have to know the definition of the relationship escalator. You know the relationship escalator. It is featured in rom-coms and love songs and Jane Austen novels. And it's everywhere around us. And it is the most important adult-adult relationship that you can have. Those singles feel incomplete. They're looking for their better half. They're looking for their other half. They are hopeless romantics, wanting to find their Mr. Darcy and to have it all and have that bliss and to be accepted and to celebrate it with all of these things along the way, engagements and weddings and honeymoons and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the solos of the world may or may not want that, but they feel differently about it. So that first group, I call them the someday group, right? The somedays, the hopeless romantics. The next group is the folks who feel complete. That is, they are a whole person, right? They have this solo mentality. They may welcome someone coming into their life, but it's not to fix their problems, it's to add value to their life. Right? And so these people tend to be more autonomous, they're more self-reliant. They also tend to be unconventional thinkers more generally because they sort of, they see the matrix a little bit better, so to speak. The group of what I would call hopeful romantics, the people who would welcome that person and want that sort of traditional relationship, I call them the just may group. I just may find my Mr. Darcy, but if I don't, that's okay. Life goes on and I have this other full, rich life. There's two other groups. The next group is the no way group. That is that they are not interested in dating or a relationship at the moment. This is not a goal of theirs. And this is an incredibly large group, Kristen. There are 128 million single adults in the United States. So nearly 1 out of every 2 adults are single. Half of those single adults, according to a Pew Center study, are not interested in dating or a relationship. This is an incredibly big group. And I say this, and I want to say it very, very clearly. It is just as normal to want a relationship as it is to not want a relationship. And there's almost no conversation for the no way group. And then the final group, again, share those same things. They feel whole, they're complete, they tend to be self-reliant. This group especially are unconventional thinkers. These are the people who would like a relationship, but it's going to look different. It's going to play by a different set of rules than the traditional escalator relationship. So for example, I've never wanted to live with someone. And those happy, healthy relationships that ended, if they didn't end because of children, they ended because my girlfriend wanted to move in. And as much as I loved her, I didn't want that to happen. Maybe those relationships are non-monogamous. Maybe they're friends with benefits. Maybe they're a platonic partnership. They lack sex and or romanticism within them. And so this is the new way group. They're looking at relationships in a new way, in a way that works for them, works for their preferences and their feelings and their desires, and for the people who are involved in their life. And so I see you as a solo. I don't know if you're a just may, a no way, or a new way person, but the way you talk about being single is that it is an option, but not a necessity. You're not going to look back at your life and feel like a failure because you didn't do this thing.
Absolutely. As I've gotten older, reflection upon those relationship experiences have been very clear. Even happy in them, I would thrive on my freedom and not checking in. I mean, same reason I'm an entrepreneur. I'm not here for a boss, or I'll do the hard work. I'll do all my things I need to do, but I'm not really one that's guided by a leader as such. So, and even in a relationship, it's about compromising things. And in due time, I think even the new way is appealing. And as you said, like 25% of our young adults or millennials are projected never to marry. I would think that's right. Even if you get around a group of young people, I can't even keep up with all the labels that they aren't.
Lots of new ways.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm here as a branding professional. I think most of it's over branded. I say, just do you, but I know society needs to package these things in. But we have no idea what's coming or how it gets together. I just care that people are happy, because you see on a larger scale, mental health and wellness and everything else, if those labels are important, right, or feeling whole in whatever space you walk in is really, a key piece to your happiness. That's what matters, because now we're dealing with school shootings and much larger issues.
Indeed.
But yes, the solo community, I think, provides that space for people to identify and feel at home in some capacity.
Yeah. And I think, there's been a bunch of work prior to me getting involved in this movement that looks at what's called singleism. How are singles discriminated against? They pay, there's a whole bunch of workplace stuff that they deal with. There's tax issues, there's the cost of living, et cetera. But to me, the biggest challenge, and this is where I see the biggest difference between men and women, is just the sheer pressure of it all. Mm-hmm. And it's coming at you, again, oftentimes well-meaning pressure, which is like, Kristen, you're so great. Why are you single?
All the time,
right? When are you going to have a child? Yep. When are you going to start a family? All these kinds of things. And women feel that pressure more so, in part because they're on a clock, mm-hmm. so to speak. And so there's this sort of waiting for Mr. Right to come along, because some people are single by choice. Some people make this choice to do this. Other people are single by chance. So I have a forthcoming episode with Melanie Notkin, and she has presented this idea of otherhood. These are women who value children, but for some circumstance, she calls it circumstantial infertility, they have not had a child, or they won't have a child. And that's, so these often women feel a lot of pressure. They feel guilt, they feel shame for not doing this thing that's there. And so, those people, especially who are single by chance, who might be struggling, maybe they're in a place where it's hard to find good partners. Maybe they're just in a bad place in general. Sometimes it's just purely just bad luck. You invested a lot into a relationship and it didn't break the right way, and you ended it rather than continuing a bad relationship. And so a lot of those conversations are kind of around, how do you make this thing work in a new world where suddenly there's not just this one way to do it, where everybody couples up soon after, high school, soon after college, and then they stumble along for 40 years, some happy, some not. But the one piece of that one, gold medal, that gold star that they're looking for, is time elapsed, right? How do you judge a relationship in current society? By the length of time that it existed. And I think that's a terrible metric. It's a really terrible metric, because you can have a meaningful relationship that may last a few weeks or months or a couple years, that may change your life. You may look back on it fondly, and it spurred great growth. And you might be in a relationship for 10 years that you look back on and you go, I can't believe I wasted all of that mm-hmm. time. We need a different metric by which to judge the quality of our relationships.
Well, absolutely. And I think it should be your own personal happiness, and only one person can answer that, and that's you.
That's right.
But you have to have, an evolved set of skills of your own personal awareness that I think also isn't talked about, when we're young, that comes much later, at least for myself. Mm-hmm. But I have a lot of female younger listeners, and that's why I was so excited to have this conversation, because I think even at 41, I'm experiencing probably a different sort of, judgment from my surrounding communities, my fellow humans, than they are. I don't know that it's more acceptable or less acceptable, but I feel like they care less than I did at their age, mm-hmm. because they do see more of a diverse circumstance across all arenas. But I think it's important for our women to hear, in particular, that don't feel pressure that's going to, especially for my ones that don't feel like, they sound like how you were very young. I don't think I was very clear early on. But I've also, my career and everything else is always just kind of like, I've followed my heart, as cliche as it sounds, and just gone the way. I've never been super clear on a destination, not motivated, just open.
Yes.
But for my young ones that are pretty clear that that's not the space they want to go, I think it's so important for my young females, regardless of what you are hearing or not hearing, to lean into that. And I think this podcast, while we're older, exemplifies that community. And just at the minimum, they know it's a thing.
Mm-hmm. Can I say something? Mm-hmm. The story of the rise of singles is a story of the rise of women. So there are many reasons why we have more single people on the planet than ever before. So one is just simply longevity. People are living longer, and you just happen to have an age gap, and so men tend to die younger. So you have a whole bunch of older women. You have more singles in societies that have immigration, because immigrants tend to be singles. They also tend to be entrepreneurs. I think, so singles are overly represented as entrepreneurs because they have the freedom to take these big risks, to swing for the fences that's there. Something also, an invention, one of the greatest inventions is birth control. Talk about liberating women to be able to make their own choices, to pursue their own paths. There was a time where if you got pregnant, you're getting married. The shotgun wedding was a real thing till very recently. And then most importantly, women are doing better than ever economically and educationally. And you know what happens when you give women access to education and you give them access to economic opportunities? Some of them decide, I don't need a man to survive. There was a time in US history and other places in the world, and it still exists today in some places in the world like India. If you want to leave the familial home, if you want to leave the house that you grew up in, mm-hmm. you had to move in with a man, because that was the only way you could support yourself. And so I like the word spinster. So it's used as a pejorative to describe women like you, Kristen. Yeah. And I think it's unfortunate because actually your spinster sisters in the 17th century, 18th century, provided a valuable service. They could create textiles, they could spin a loom. And this was important work, and they could be paid for it in a place where women almost could not find jobs. They could be paid well enough that these women could live on their own. These were liberated women who were looked down upon, but they were the precursors of today's women who get to decide whether they want to get married, who get to decide whether they want to have children. And it just happens when you give women choice, some of them decide to do it, and some of them decide not to do it. And I think that that's a world that I want to live in. And that's a world that if I had a daughter, I would want her to live in. And so the story of the rise of singles is a story of women's empowerment. Mm-hmm. This is not something that should be lamented. Now, the flip side of that is when you give women access to education and you give them economic opportunities, some of them will start to outclass the men in their life, and they'll find it difficult to find a worthy partner. And that, I think, is an unfortunate downside and is a very real problem for a subset of women who would like to do this traditional thing.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because there's a few categories here. And I agree with you. It is very much a female movement, and there's in-depth conversation about birth control and female rights, and obviously everything we're dealing with the government right now. Indeed. And Roe versus Wade, probably need some weed, but there's a lot of angles we can go here. But it's funny that there's a multitude of categories, because I am around a bunch of women like myself that are entrepreneurial, have their own business, or have got married later in life, have frozen their eggs. Some have chosen to have a baby without a partner and just use insemination, all these different things. And I have a group of friends that truthfully, they are remarkable females. They're looking for an incredible man. And they've really, and I'm a feminist at heart, but I'm also a misogynist. Like I'm really here for people to just be happy. It's not about one better or worse or what have you, but it's a thing. I will say my personal experience of people, a lot of women not being able to find their equal.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even know that was really like a talked about thing outside of our female circle group, but it's really true. Why do you think that is such a major piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, I mean, so now let's wade into a little bit about the downside for men. So men are struggling. So first of all, men are unpopular right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a nice way to put it, right? And as a result of their unpopularity, the world's turned a blind eye to their challenges. So I mentioned the age gap earlier. On average, an American man spends 7 to 8 years less on this planet than a woman. Why is that? Well, some of it is he works more dangerous jobs. He's more likely to be murdered. He's more likely to be homeless. He's more likely to commit suicide. He's more likely to be an alcoholic. So men are struggling in a lot of ways, and in some ways they're really falling behind. That's hard to imagine in a world where where most male billionaires and CEOs and senators are men. But when you look across all of men, not just the most successful 0.1%, you see a lot of men struggling with loneliness. More men live with their parents than women, for example. Campuses are getting out of proportion, where more than 60% of undergraduates are women now, and there are men who are just quitting. They're just stepping out, and the worst of them are getting involved in the manosphere, the incels, playing video games, leaning into pornography, and so on. And those men have zero chance of actually having a healthy relationship, because one is they're not developing the skills for a healthy relationship. Moreover, no successful woman would want anything to do with them. And so what you have is this sort of world of haves and have-nots. And in the dating pool, this is really quite striking. So, for example, the average man on Tinder takes 100 swipes to match with a woman. Average woman takes 10 swipes to match with a man. We're talking heterosexual right now, right? And so, but the men who do get the hits, are the successful ones, and there's just not enough to go around. If, again, and this is the big if you expect your partner to do it all, and if you think about it, as we move from arranged marriages to love marriages, which I believe is generally a good move in the world, that you get to choose your life partner rather than your in-laws and your parents, the pressure for your partner to be a good lover, to be a good listener, to be a good provider, to want a vacation with you, to want to have the same lifestyle, to eat the same things, to do all the things together is such a steep task. It's such a high set of expectations. For some people, they just can never find that person, because they statistically don't exist. Like, if you are a woman who makes $300,000 a year and wants a man over 6 feet tall, good luck finding him, because he's such a tiny part of the population. And so we have this sort of tale of two worlds, where you have a whole bunch of men who are struggling with loneliness, misogyny, feeling left out of society, and then too small a pool to be good partners for your group of friends who are searching. And the pressure as the clock ticks along, as I said, can be a lot to handle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think you said something really key, though, that every relationship struggles with, or something in addition to like being single as socially acceptable, not having your relationship be everything. I don't think your husband or wife needs to be your best friend, your liaison in this, your business partner. Like, I think it can be, I always advise to all my friends, and myself included, keep your friends close, like have your significant other,
Yes.
and then have your best friends. Like, that man doesn't need to be my best friend or have all my girl talk, or like have a balance. And I think that conversation itself is overlooked. You're looking for this person to be everything. I don't think anyone can do that.
It's very difficult. I mean, I know some people who do it, but they are, they're the exception rather than the rule. But the world teaches you, the rom-coms, the love songs, and the Jane Austen novels suggest that this is the way it's supposed to be. This is where I believe that singles have advantages over partnered people, right? Because one thing is that singles actually have a more diverse group of friends and connections. They're more involved in their community. They're more likely to volunteer. They're more likely to donate their time. They have what I call a team. And so the happy ones have a team, a group of people, that are friends and family, that they, like I have friends I call when I have business problems, and I have friends I call when I have relationship problems, and I have friends that I call when I want to stay in on a Friday night, and I have friends I call when I want to go out on a Saturday night. No one of my friends can do all of those things for me, nor do they need to. And what happens is if a friend goes on a long trip, I'm happy for them. I don't feel jealous because they're not there to support me, because I have this other group of people. And so I talk about how solos have a team, this diverse group of interconnected people that help fill those needs for us. And I agree with you. I think that, when I'm in a relationship, I relax. I avoid what I call the benification of relationships, right? Ben and Jennifer become Benifer. And it's like, if you want to go to Vegas for the weekend, go have a good time. If you want to go to the beach, go. I'm more of a mountain guy. You know what I mean? Like it in no way diminishes our love for each other. And moreover, I have, and I believe the solos do this, they have a lot of love to give. And so they don't have to reserve it for this small number of people. I have a good friend from college. We've kept in touch. We've gone in completely different paths. He's a family man, lives in the suburbs, makes good money, 3 kids, beautiful wife, loving household, happy guy. Listens to the podcast, calls me every so often. I'm hanging up. Before I hang up to him, I said, I love you. And the next time we talked, he said to me, I didn't know how to respond to that because I only use those words for my family. And I said, that's okay. I just want you to know that I have love in my heart for you. And I get to say I love you a lot to a lot of people. And I think that's incredibly liberating to be able to do that. I don't have to reserve this love for this small group who has to be everything for me. And so, I think your advice for your friends is really excellent.
Well, everyone take that note, write that down, tell your friend you love them. Because I think that, and so it's sincere and endearing. Our world needs just that. Like, just tell people you love them a little bit more. And the fact that you said it and then he thought about it later, I think that's a big piece too. So it's struck and it's like, well, I don't know what to do, but then he probably really felt it. And sometimes even in the relationships, they may not be feeling the love. So you don't know how big of impact, that simple statement can be. So I really applaud that. I appreciate you sharing that. I hope our young men and any age men alike hear that.
I tell my male friends I love them a lot. I do. I love them. I'm not the person. I'm not the man that I am without them. Yeah.
I think that runs in like ancient civilizations, regardless of your sexual orientation. Women need their women, men need their men. It's a very tribal communion thing. And I think you need to keep your same-sex humans in your life in some capacity forever.
Yeah. And I also have many women friends who are completely platonic. And I love them too. I really feel incredibly lucky. What I needed to do, honestly, was just shift my mindset. I didn't need to change my life. I didn't need to change the way I was living. I just needed to go, oh, what I am doing is right for me. And there are many remarkable paths that people can walk in their life.
Absolutely. And that's quite literally a branding professional. That's what I do with most, because I work specifically with mission-driven humans and companies. And that's literally what it is. Usually I have to change nothing. All we do is shift the mindset and the way we're sharing with the world. And it's all the gold is there. And that's just such a metaphor at large. I do want to talk about, we've got about 15 minutes.
Sure. Because
I'm so intentional about getting graceful disruption, getting our words out to our younger people to shift that mindset. when do you think it's an appropriate age, even if you're married with your kids, or if you're going to speak to 16, 17-year-olds, I don't know what your youngest audience is, what's like an appropriate age to start talking about the solo life?
Oh, I think when it becomes appropriate to talk about relationships. So think about it, right? This world is all made up.
Yeah.
Right. This was not predestined to be the case. There's little evidence that monogamy was meant to be. The marriage is a relatively recent invention. It was basically invented by church and government. It was a way to pass wealth through families. It's really about land ownership. And so all of this stuff is just made up. And so when the socialization around marriage starts, there ought to be a conversation around living a life without a partnership, in part because a child today will spend most of their life single.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them will spend their entire life single, but when you look at, it used to be the case that most of people's lives were spent married. That is no longer the case. 28% of households in the United States are solo. That is their one occupant. There's a very good chance that child will live alone. That number is as high as 50% in some Northern European cities like Stockholm, Sweden.
Okay.
And so to equip these children with the belief that their life can be good think about this. How terrible is it that if only a fraction of your life is going to be spent in a partnership, that all the time not in that partnership, you feel less than? And do you want your children to feel less than? No, mm-hmm. Not at all. And so I think having role models, right? So aunts and uncles like myself who aren't married, to be able to have them involved and to be able to celebrate what it is that what makes their life good, I think is really important. I actually have an editor that I work with. She's a mother of, I think, 3, and she constantly is balancing the conversation, which is like, well, if you do that, that will be great, but it would be okay if you didn't do that. So I think as soon as the conversations around marriage and partnerships and stuff come up, it's appropriate to provide an alternative narrative.
I'm glad to hear. I think that's right. And I love that you just said, we say this on Turmeric Tequila because I'm a big philosophy fan. Reality is nothing more than applied meaning. It's all made up. So anytime somebody's stressed out, I'm like, take a breath. It's all bullshit. Don't we just apply new meaning? We'll rebrand this. We'll redo it. But that's what it is. And it's the socialization and monetization of all these events, like marriage. I mean, these are multi-billion-dollar businesses that are monetizing your hopes and dreams and aspirations that you've been sold to. So that's another podcast. But I want to shift just because we are on a timeline. How do you handle these conversations when you are dating, or how do you handle dating in general, knowing that you don't want it to lead to marriage?
Yeah. So as I said, I'm a new way person. I do date. I like dating. I have made a major shift in my life. It happened last year when I returned from living in Los Angeles to moving back to Denver and restarting my job at CU Boulder. And I do it through honesty. No, I do it 2 ways. So the number one is I am 100% honest with the people I go out with. So I tell them early, I don't want to have children. I tell them early, I don't want to move in with someone. I essentially say to them, I am eager to co-design a relationship with you. If you find me interesting, attractive, we get to decide the rules. We're not going to just accept this model about how we're supposed to behave. And so I end up having these like very open, positive, sometimes a little uncomfortable and a little unnerving because people aren't really used to this, where we get to decide what are the rules. So for example, I started seeing a woman, like her a lot, and she's launching a product. She lives in a world like you do, Kristen. And she said, I'm not going to be available for all of March and maybe beyond. And she was sort of like, well, maybe we shouldn't get this started. And I said to her, well, that's fine if we can agree to not talk the entire month of March. And if we both agree, that's not a step back in our relationship. If anything, it's a step forward. Think about how empowering that is. And you could just see her like wheels turning. And she goes, oh, I've never thought about it this way. Because to her, relationships always need to progress. They can never take a break. The other thing is that what I've been doing is seeking out unconventional thinkers. I'm not interested in convincing a woman who wants to ride the escalator and wants the big, the big church wedding and the white dress and all that stuff. I'm going to be a bad match for her. This is a segmentation and targeting problem, right? So I want to find women who think differently about the world, who are more interested in, maybe I'll date casually, or if I do have a more serious relationship, it's going to look like this. I don't want to move in with someone either. You'd be amazed how many people don't want to move in with someone. They're just scared to tell you that. And so, I'm on different dating apps. I'm not on Hinge because Hinge is meant to be deleted and meant to be deleted forever. And so I'm just a disappointment to the people in that space. So to me, it's a mix of picking the right people, communicating 100% honestly, which is, by the way, something that people don't do enough. They're not vulnerable. Like I risk every time I talk to a woman who I go out on a date with, I risk her not just rejecting me, I risk her going, ew.
Yeah.
Right? Ew, because this is a moral issue for some people. But if I don't talk this way, I'm never going to find a satisfying, healthy, happy connection that works for me. And so I feel like I'm in a brave new world. This feels like this is a positive sum world that I live in, not a negative sum one.
Has this process gotten easier as time's gone on, as this conversation's built in society?
I would say, I'd say I have to do a little bit of sort of coaching and teaching with some partners, but then others, folks who come out of the sort of sex positive kink community, for example, they're very used to having these conversations. Yeah. They're just used to having them around sexuality. I just want to expand them into a more, a sort of a broader array of like, what is our lifestyle going to be like? What are expectations for communication going to be like? And so on. Everybody talks about how important communication is. Who some of the worst communicators are people who are living the normal traditional life because the world tells them how to behave. Yeah. And so the moment you deviate, then the need to talk goes way, way up.
Absolutely. What's a quick piece of advice if you've got, again, kind of leaning towards my younger listeners? What if they're not sure? Like, what if I don't really know if I want to be married? Not sure. Like, I think self-awareness, and those are things I did. They came later in my life. I wish we'd learned some of these skill sets, in high school or middle school. Even.
I know.
It would have saved us probably so much time, money, energy, all the things. But what is something?
Yes. Yeah. Emotions. Yeah.
Which, you can't really take back that either. But what's something for like our younger guys that are not sure? Do you have like a good exercise or piece of advice where they can start to lean into what they authentically want? Because I think that's really this point of this conversation. It's not get married or don't get married. It's about getting in alignment with what you truly want within to find your own happiness.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, because it's a really challenging question. So I think the first thing is to accept the fact that what you may want is not what the average person wants, right? There's just, if you feel a little bit strange or wrong, or there's something you feel like, there's something off about me, just know that it is normal to feel that way, right? Remember, half of people don't even want a relationship, right? So if you want one that looks a little different or feels a little different, that's normal also. It's just there's not enough conversation with it. The big thing I would say is it's okay to experiment with it, right? It's okay to try something and see how it feels and see, does it work with this particular partner? And to do so, though, is to really to embrace vulnerability. That is to be brave. And people will surprise you. High integrity partners will surprise you if you say to them, listen, I really like you. I'll give you a quick example of this. This is from a male's perspective. So I've been actually, you were talking about, I'm getting stronger, right? So I started working with a trainer, and young guy, good looking guy, fit, is dating. He has no money because he's a young trainer, He's just getting his career going. He's got college debts, etc. He doesn't have a lot of time either. He doesn't drink. He's not doing all the typical kinds of things. He's training for a bodybuilding competition. And I said to him, all right, here I was like, here's some old guy advice. You ready? You meet someone you like. You say, listen, I really like you. I'm building my career. I don't have a lot of liquidity right now. Moreover, I'm training for this bodybuilding competition. I can't go to the Olive Garden with you and eat a ton of pasta, and I'm not going to be out drinking, kind of thing. However, I will make time for you. We can have a lot of fun. We can go to museums. We can go on walks. We can do these other things, which are really, can be really quite enjoyable. I would love to continue to see you. If you don't want that, I understand, and I wish you the best finding someone who can give that to you. But if you're willing to do this a little bit differently, I think we can make this work. And you should have just seen, like, he had never thought that way, right? He's trying to do this one thing and it's never going to fit for him in this sense. And I said this, if she really likes you, and if she's a good match, she'll be thrilled to go to a date that costs $10 at a museum, right? And if she wants the fancy dinners and the finer things in life, then she needs to go find someone who does that. And you're doing both of you a favor by being honest and being vulnerable with that. And I said, give it a try. And so I have a saying on the podcast, and that's ask for what you want. The average person never asks for what you want. So I think I would just sum up the advices to your listeners is ask for what you want, see how it feels. And then again, lean into the high integrity people in your life and move away from the ones who aren't.
Amen. And I hope you got that lifting session for free since you did the consultation.
I didn't. He needs the money more than I do.
I'm just kidding. I was like, no, I look out for my personal trainers, but I know the hustle's so real, and they're doing all. And those conversations when you're training can be so instrumental and good for both sides. So there's a lot of magic that happens. Really quick, tell us where we find you, what you have coming up, anything else you want to share.
Sure, certainly. So I think you can find everything at petermcgraw.org/solo. You can find the podcast, Solo, the Single Person's Guide to a Remarkable Life, anywhere podcasts can be found. I don't just do advocacy work. I also am hosting cultural events. So I do something called the Solo Salon. So I'm bringing the old European salon of entertainment and culture back to celebrate proud singles. I'm going to be doing one in July. You can find that on the Solo page on petermcgraw.org. I also have a private community that's active where we talk through these things via Slack channel. You can apply also in that place.
Check out all the amazing things. You just got a swipe today, a quick conversation of all the things Dr. McGraw is involved with, but go see what he has going on. This is a human truly walking his own path. It's super inspiring. I really appreciate the time, energy, and vulnerability of you sharing that journey, but there's so much more to go in. So go see what he has going on. Dr. McGraw, I appreciate you so much. And thank you for joining us on Turmeric and Tequila.
Thank you, Kristen. It's been great.
Thank you for joining Turmeric and Tequila with your host, Kristen Olson. Tune in next time, and don't forget to subscribe on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.